So on to our first demo. In this case, we're going to be helping a company deliver their large home appliances. So for the most part, what they're wanting to do is deliver these appliances, but they do have customers that want to exchange one for another or simply return the appliance. So they need to model all of those options. They're interested in the cost for the driver and the vehicle. And because of the appliances being both large and heavy, they need to make sure that they don't overload these vehicles in both dimensions, volume and weight. The trucks are large and have absolutely terrible turning radiuses, so the company doesn't want them trying to make U-turns for the safety of the vehicle and those around it. They're also concerned about the driver's safety, so they don't want them trying to cross the street with these large appliances. So they require that they park on the same side of the street as the customer. The drivers are going to have a 10-hour workday with a 1-hour lunch break, and our premium customers are going to give 2 or 4-hour appointment times. So switching into ArcMap, we're going to do all of our demos today in the San Francisco Bay Area. The customer locations are the purple circles here, and the warehouse for this company is this green square. Everyone sets up ArcMap just a little differently, so just to give you a quick orientation, here's my table of contents with the different layers for the demos. This one here is the network analyst window. That's where we set up our layer. If you don't see that up within the network analyst toolbar here, you can toggle that on and off using this button, and you can get a new layer using this drop-down. So we'll start by looking at our layer properties. We've got 2 things in here that we're particularly concerned about for this model. The first is capacity count. So we need to set this to 2 so that the solver knows that it's looking for both volume and weight within one field. The other thing is the global U-turn policy. So for them, they realize that occasionally at dead ends, you're going to have to turn around and make a U-turn. So that's the only exception they allow to that policy. So U-turns allowed only at dead ends. Next, we'll take a look at the orders and how we've set that up. So the first thing of note in here is our service time. That's how long that the driver spends at individual customer location. It ranges in time from a half hour to an hour and a quarter. And then next to it is our time windows. That's where we set the appointment times for those customers. They had 2 and 4-hour time windows, so here's an example of a 2-hour morning time window from 10 to noon. And here's some afternoon time windows, 1 to 5 and 1 to 3. Scrolling over a little, we'll next look at the delivery and pickup quantities. So this is how much appliance is getting delivered to that individual customer location. And this is where we want both volume and weight in one field. So to do that, we'll look at this one. We've got 160. That's the volume in cubic feet. And then we separate the numbers with a space. And that space says to the solver it's now ready for a second value. Next, we've got 960. That's the weight in pounds. So for the most part, you'll see that it's deliveries with nulls for pickups. Here's an example of what an exchange is like, where it's got both the delivery and the pickup. And here's a return, where all it has is the pickup quantity. The last thing within the orders that we're going to take a look at is curb approach. And I went right past it. There it is. So curb approach is where we can indicate per order how we want that vehicle to approach that stop. So in San Francisco, we drive on the right-hand side of the street, and we want the vehicle to park on the same side as the customer. So if we indicate that it's right side of vehicle, that would then make it so that the customer's on the right side, the vehicle's on the right side, and then the driver doesn't have to cross that street at all. Down here at the bottom, we've got a few that are modeled with either side of vehicle. That's for locations that are commercial locations with a parking lot that they've deemed large enough for that vehicle to actually go in and turn around safely within that parking lot. That allows that truck to come from either side of the street and make a left or right-hand turn into that location. So that's it for orders. We'll take a look at how I've modeled the routes next. So routes for our solver are both the driver and the vehicle. In this case, we're going to model 4 routes, and they're all the same. But if in your case you have, say, 20 different vehicle driver combinations that you need to model, you can model them all differently. So the first thing we needed to know is where that route is supposed to start and end. So at a minimum, we have to have either the start depot or the end depot or both, but you can't have them both as null values. So in this case, they all start and end at the warehouse. Next, we need to know when that route is supposed to start. So with earliest start time and latest start time, you indicate that. In this case, they wanted it to start at 8 a.m. sharp, so they made both of these values 8 a.m. Scrolling over, next we come to the capacities. And so this is where you indicate how much that truck is able to handle. And again, this is both volume and weight. So it starts with the volume, 1,000 cubic feet, followed by that space, and then 20,000 pounds. So it's really important that these are in the exact same sequencing as you used for the orders. So the solver matches them up correctly, and you're getting responses that are what you're intending. Next is the cost for these routes. In this case, we modeled both the cost per unit time and cost per unit distance. So the driver gets paid $24 an hour, and that goes into cost per unit time. And then they've just figured out that it costs 80 cents per mile for this vehicle to operate, so that goes into cost per unit distance. And then the last thing that we're interested in on the routes is the maximum allowed for these routes. In this case, we've got 2, the max order count and the max total time. Max order count is a required field for our solver, but it's not necessarily a required business constraint for everyone. So you need to come up with some way to make that value large enough that it doesn't restrict your actual routes and cut them short, but small enough that it doesn't affect the solver performance. So it wasn't a business constraint in this case. So here's how we came up with that value. Next to it, the max total time was a business constraint at 10 hours. If you think back to our service times, the shortest service time we had was a half hour. Now imagine every customer had that half hour service time and there was absolutely no driving. The most you could ever do in one day is 20. So that's how we came up with max order count of 20. So that's the routes. The last thing that we needed to model was breaks. So we model a break for each route. And here's how we set it up for this case. We wanted it to start sometime between noon and 1, and we wanted a 1-hour lunch break, so the service time was set to 1. The drivers also don't get paid during this time, so we made is paid equal to false. So we set that up for all four routes, and we're ready for our first solve. All right, we've got a solution here that we can give to our drivers. I do notice, though, that this red route looks a lot shorter than the others. Perhaps it's got a long service time in all of its customers, but I want to take a look at that. So within the routes table, I'm going to scroll over to total time. So within total time here, I notice Route 1 has 5.5 hours worth of work, and Route 3 has just shy of 10 hours. Now I can see both drivers coming to me as the planner and being upset. Driver 1, he's going to come to me saying, I have bills to pay, I really need to work more hours. Whereas driver 3, he's going to come to me and say, did I upset you? I mean, really, why do I work so much more than driver 1? That's just not fair. And so some of the times for a business, it's really important to try and balance these workloads, even though that might mean a little bit less optimal on the driving solution. So if that's the case for you, you can use overtime to influence the solver to make these workloads a little bit more balanced. So here's how you would do that. Within total time, I'm going to look and see what our average workday should be. So the mean here is 8.25. I'm going to round down to about 8 hours. If my mouse works. Wasn't ready for that one. There we go. All right, going over to overtime now. Within the overtime start time, oh, I got flustered, sorry. Field calculator. I'm going to make that 8 hours. So I'm just using the field calculator to populate all 4 at once. And then we're going to make the cost per unit overtime double our hourly wage at $48 per hour. And we're ready to solve this a second time. All right, it's looking better, but I want to confirm with the time. So back in the route table, I'm going to take a look at the total time again. And now we've got 7.5 hours and just barely over 9 hours. So that's probably a lot better for our drivers to be happy with. And we'll go ahead and give these solutions to them for the day.